Welcome back to our video series on creating tests in Ultra. This video is on setting up your test settings. If you haven't created your questions yet, you'll want to watch those videos first because some of the settings don't apply until you have questions in your test. Once you've done that, let's get started. We've got 5 questions in our test and we are ready to set it up so the students can take it. Over here on the right, you'll see the test settings, and you'll see links by all of them. Generally, I just recommend clicking the gear because clicking any of those links will take you to the same place. So I'm going to come up here and click the gear, and the test settings peak panel will pop out. So the first thing I need to set is a due date, and in Ultra, every graded item is required to have a due date. This will display to students in the calendar and activity stream for your course. It will also do a little bit more control here that we'll get to in just a second. So I'm going to set a due date. We'll just set it for Halloween here. At midnight is fine. So the way the due date behaves is dictated by these 2 boxes here underneath it. If neither of them are checked, then the student will still be able to submit, but their submission will be marked as late, and if it is a scholar gradable thing, then you will actually have to go look at it just to give you a chance to penalize them for being late. We're going to start at the bottom for the more advanced ones. If I click Prohibit New Attempts after due date, the student cannot start the test after the due date, but if they've started it even a second before that due date and time, so even at 11:59 p.m. on the 30th in our case, then they'll be able to take the test and have as much time as you would normally give them. Now, that's exactly how tests behaved in original courses. However, you can also prohibit late submissions. If you do this, as soon as that due date and time is reached, the test will be automatically submitted. So if a student starts at 11:59 p.m. on the 30th, they have 1 minute to do as much as they can on the test, and then at midnight, it's submitted. Keep going here. Allow class conversations is something that would allow students to message back and forth about this test. Generally, it's only used for asynchronous things and rarely for tests. Down here, we have presentation options. The first ones display 1 question at a time. If you check that box, students will only see 1 question, and will actually have to page through those questions one by one. If you do check that, you can also prohibit them from being able to go back to previous questions in the test. Generally, unless you're testing them for some sort of certification that works that way, I don't recommend clicking this prohibit backtracking. There's no real known bugs with it, but there's a lot of things that could go wrong, and there's not a lot of recourse for the student. You can then randomize the order of the questions. This is an easy, simple way to discourage cheating. You can also randomize the order of the multiple choice answers. This will randomize all of them. It's an all or nothing thing in Ultra tests. We keep going down here. You have the ability to designate the assessment as formative. That's really all it does right now. It'll show up in the grade book as formative, but not really anything else. And if you do declare it as formative, it will also allow you to choose whether you show that to students. As we keep going down here, we can choose what category in the gradebook it goes in. If you need information on setting up categories, see our materials on the gradebook. We can also choose how many attempts are allowed for the test, and this is attempts for the whole test. They have until they click submit to do each question, unless you've specifically prohibited backtracking. So you can go from 1 to 10 or unlimited. If you do have multiple attempts, you actually have to choose which attempt counts. So usually people choose either the last attempt with a grade, which means if they take it again, it can either help or hurt their grade, or the attempt with the highest grade, which means that reattempting the test can only help them. You also have some other options here. You can average the attempts. You can choose the first attempt with a grade, which is actually useful if you want them to take the test once for real and then be able to retake the test to study. There's also attempt with the lowest grade, but I generally don't recommend using that one. You can choose whether the grade displays to students as points, letter, or percentage, or if you have other grading schemas that you've created, you can select those. Again, that will be in our gradebook materials about what each of those means. If you have test questions, you actually can't set the maximum points. Notice they're grayed out, so we can't deal with that. And the next couple of options are for more assignment type things where students will submit something. Now we see assessment grade here, and you'll see a checkbox for post-assessment grades automatically. So remember, in Ultra courses, normally grades don't show up to students until you post the grades. This is usually what you want because it gives you a chance to grade all the students before you give anybody their grade. Now, this might not be what you want though if you've got a test that's all auto-graded by Scholar. You might want the students to have their results immediately. And so in that case, you just check this box here, and the students would be able to see their grades as soon as they take the test. Since I have an essay question in my test, I'm going to uncheck that box. We keep going down here, we see the assessments results section. So this assessment results section controls when the students see not their grades, but the other information that they get with the test. So their actual test submission, the feedback that's automated for the question if you set that up, basically whether they got the questions right or wrong, and the correct answers. So if you click any of these links, you'll get taken to the same place. And here you have a checkbox next to each action. So we've got allow students to view their submission. Notice it's checked. And we can control when students can view their submission. So after their submission, after their grade is posted, after the due date, after all grades are posted, or on a specific date. These are very similar to the feedback settings in original courses. However, the bugs that prevented you from using some of them in original courses no longer exist. So then you see where the automated feedback shows with the same answers, and then the question scores, you get fewer options with this one because they can't see the question scores until at least their grade is posted. It makes sense. They can't see their grade until their grade's posted. And at the bottom here, we have show correct answers. And we really don't generally want to do after individual grade is posted, except on very low stakes items, because students could share the answers with those who haven't taken the test yet. If we're happy with this, we click Save, and we go right back to the test options. And we'll keep going here. We've got an access code. If you have an in-class test that you want a way to ensure that the people are actually in the class who are taking it, you can click this Add Access Code, and it will generate a random number that you have to actually give to the students when they're in the classroom with you. There's also the Respondus settings. Respondus works a bit differently than in original courses, and we'll have a video on that coming out soon. Under additional tools, we can add a time limit to our test. It's pretty simple. You add it in minutes. We'll make this one a 5-minute test. And you can either have the work automatically saved and submit, or you can give them extra time. Now, you're able to take points off if you give them extra time. You can either give them 50% more time, 100% more time, or unlimited extra time if you do that. Generally, we want the work to be automatically saved and submitted when time expires. Can't use a grading rubric when you've got questions. We don't use goals. That's a whole separate module that you can buy extra for Blackboard. Groups don't work with tests. And then finally, we can enable Safe Assign. Now, you might say that doesn't make much sense. Safe Assign's for assignments. Well, it's a little different in Ultra courses. You can actually enable Safe Assign, and it will check essay questions through Safe Assign. So we can enable it here. And just like for an assignment, you can either allow the students to see their report or not. And you don't really want to check this exclude submissions from the databases. That's really only for if the students have draft items. And in a test type environment, they wouldn't have that. We'll let them see their report and click Save. And then we're all done with our settings. So we can click Save, and they will take. So there's one last setting, and that is the visibility for the students. And that's up here at the top right. It's not with the rest of our settings. And it's hidden by default, which makes sense because we want to build this before we show it to anybody. Now, we could just change it to visible to students, but that would mean they could take it right away, which is generally not what you want for things like tests. So for things like tests, we're actually going to need to use the release conditions, and we need to set a date-time condition. We're going to say show on, and we're just going to pick the date when we want the test to start. Start it then, that's fine. Now you could do a hide after, but you really don't need to in this case because we've already set a due date, and it's actually easier to give exceptions to due dates than it is to give exceptions to hide after. So we're just going to leave the hide after blank and let the due date kind of do its thing. Then you can scroll down here and you can choose basically whether you want the test to be visible as existing. If you say show, they can't open the test and get to it, but they can see that there is a test. If you choose hide, it's like it works on original where the test doesn't appear at all. I'm going to hit save, and our test is ready to go. That brings us to the end of this video. Our next one will cover how we grade those tests and look at individual students' tests. Thanks for watching.